Hello, my name is Charu Orta. The issue that I will be presenting today will be about child abuse and domestic violence. By the end of this presentation, I hope that everyone is able to understand the difference between child abuse and domestic violence. Know the consequences that domestic violence and child abuse has upon the life of a child, of an infant, and how these events have an impact on the decisions that they will make in the future. For us to know different methods of interventions that we can use and do in order to help them get out of this environment that they're living, and know how Buckner is addressing this issue. So what is child abuse and domestic violence? Child abuse is whenever a parent or caretaker fails to act upon the responsibilities that they have as an adult that's caring for a child. And because of this, a child might experience physical or emotional harm, sexual abuse, be neglected by their parents, or even to the point of death. On the other hand, domestic violence is whenever one partner in the relationship has control and power over the other partner in the relationship. So let's get a little bit more into domestic violence and what it means. So, like we mentioned before, domestic violence is when one partner in the relationship has this really strong desire of having power and control over their significant other. And they use different methods in order to undermine the authority that the other person has upon their own lives. So this type of abuse is a learned behavior, meaning they experience this during their childhood. They might have seen their parents arguing, or they saw how their dad would have control, treated bad their mother, hit her, or used any type of verbally or physical abuse towards them, or vice versa. So whenever they grow up, it's kind of like an instinct whenever they're with their significant other, and it just kind of happens without them even realizing what the actions that they have made. There is at least 6 types of abuse and domestic violence. There is physical, emotional, sexual and coercion, reproduction and coercion, financial abuse. Now moving on to child abuse. So in 2017, there was at least 4.1 million reports made of maltreatment in the United States, with more than 7.5 million children, meaning that this is something huge that all of us should pay more attention when it comes to working with children or with families. So going back to the domestic violence and how it's a learned behavior, is because they experience this during their childhood, and this is where they went through this kind of child abuse where it wasn't directly pointed at them, but they were living in this environment that they had exposure to this kind of violence. So In child abuse, there's four major types of child abuse: physical, sexual, neglect, and emotional maltreatment. And adding to this would be domestic violence, because even though it's not being done directly to them, they experience it somehow. So what are the consequences of living in this environment? One of them is that they live in fear that someone older than them or someone that has more control over them might do something to harm them. It lowers their self-esteem. They have psychological problems, meaning they might have PTSD, or this is where it goes into them having depression, anxiety, and as they grow older, they might abuse of substance such as drugs, alcohol. And for children, meaning they will have academic problems such as their grades going lower. They might bully other children in school, and etc. So what can we do in order to help them? The first thing that we should do is make sure that they're in a safe place. This could mean getting them into a shelter, or in other cases, we might have to separate the child from their family and send them to a foster home. And if there's a whole family, then we will move that family into a shelter, separating them from that individual that's harming them. We can suggest that they have home visitations. Having someone that goes to the house, checks upon them regularly, and talk to them, counsel them, just making sure that everything's going fine and they're not going through this again. And having parenting programs. This might be whenever there's only one parent raising the family, and we give them classes, we educate them in order for them to be independent of themselves, in order to encourage the family and have a better life for themselves. And other people might need psychotherapy and much more. So some of us might not know what Buckner is. Buckner is an organization or program that helps families, and this could be foster care, single parents, or just families in general. So Buckner has this program called Family Pathways, and they provide protection, secure homes, education, guidance, and they encourage them to improve themselves. So in this case, they might help families that have been through abuse or traumatic events, and they help them get over that and help them how to provide for themselves and their family. And for other cases, it might be that the child may be separated from their family because of what they've been through, so they'll send them to foster parents. And these foster parents, they train them, they provide training for them, so they know how to care for these children that have gone through abuse, neglect, and these really traumatic events, and how they can help them, what can they do in situations where a child might have fear or vice versa. So there's always many ways that we can do to help anyone be sure to always let other people know or call someone that knows. Call Child Protective Services whenever we see this. Call the hotline numbers whenever we see domestic violence. There's so much that we can do in order to stop domestic violence and child abuse. If you want to know more information about what I talked today in my presentation, I have left the websites that I went through, that I read over, and a book that also has a section about this. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope that you were able to learn something, and that if you have any questions, don't be afraid, ask me, and I will try my best to answer them as best as I can.